I worked 3 jobs, skipped vacations, and spent years living in tiny apartments just to buy my first home. Every extra shift, every dollar I saved, and every sacrifice led to that front door with my name on it. More than anything, I wanted my parents to walk inside, smile, and tell me they were proud of me. Instead, they drove across town to my younger brother Keaton's barbecue. I welcomed my guests with a smile, laughed at their jokes, and thanked everyone for coming. Then I slipped into my kitchen, closed the door, and cried where no one could see me before wiping my face and carrying the cake back outside. At the time, I believed that was the most painful day of my life. I was wrong. Months later, those same parents stood on my porch with tired faces and nowhere else to go, asking me for the help they had never offered when I needed them most. On the day of my housewarming, everything looked perfect from the outside. Friends, coworkers, neighbors, and the people who had supported me filled my backyard with laughter. They admired the house, brought thoughtful gifts, and celebrated a dream I had worked for alone. But every few minutes my eyes drifted toward the driveway, waiting for my parents' car to appear. Guests kept asking when Gavin and Celeste would arrive. I smiled and said they would be there soon, even though I was beginning to worry. Then my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice was calm as she explained they had decided to spend the afternoon at Keaton's barbecue because he needed family more today. She said it as though it were the most natural choice in the world. I quietly told her I understood, ended the call, and stood there staring at the screen. No one at that party realized that one simple decision would become the first domino, setting off events that would change our family forever. In the days after the housewarming, I couldn't stop thinking about that phone call. At first, I told myself not to make a big deal out of it. I had spent most of my life finding reasons to forgive my parents, convincing myself they never meant to hurt me. But this time something felt different. It was as if that afternoon had finally opened my eyes to everything I had been ignoring for years. The more I thought about my childhood, the more the pattern became impossible to deny. Whenever Keaton got into trouble, my parents rushed to fix it. If he struggled in school, they hired tutors. If he made a bad decision, they stepped in with advice and money. Every mistake came with another chance because they believed he just needed more support. My life looked completely different. When I wanted to go to college, I earned scholarships and worked long hours to pay the bills they couldn't, or wouldn't, cover. I never expected anyone to rescue me because I had learned early that no one was coming. While other students spent weekends relaxing, I was picking up extra shifts just to stay ahead. Even when something good happened, the attention never stayed on me for long. A promotion at work, finishing school, buying my first car, every achievement received a quick congratulations before the conversation turned back to Keaton. There was always another problem, another emergency, another reason why he needed everyone's focus. For years, I accepted it because I believed families went through difficult seasons. I kept telling myself things would eventually become fair. After the housewarming, I finally admitted the truth. This wasn't a temporary phase or a misunderstanding. My parents had built our family around protecting one child while expecting the other to stand alone. Once I saw it clearly, I couldn't pretend anymore. The hardest part wasn't realizing I had been treated differently. It was realizing I had spent years believing I deserved it. A few nights later, my phone rang long after dinner. I almost ignored it when I saw Keaton's name on the screen. We rarely talked unless he needed something, but for some reason I answered. The moment he started speaking, I could tell he had been drinking. His words were slow and he sounded unusually relaxed. At first, the conversation was meaningless. He joked about his barbecue, complained about business, and laughed at stories that weren't even funny. Then he said something that made my heart stop. He casually mentioned that our parents had been covering his debts for years. To him, it wasn't a secret worth hiding. He talked about checks they had written, loans they had paid off, and bills they had quietly handled whenever his business struggled. I didn't interrupt. The more silent I became, the more he kept talking. He even laughed and said, "I guess they never told you. They always knew you'd figure things out on your own." Those words stayed with me. Suddenly, so many things began to make sense. Every time my parents claimed money was tight. Every time they told me they couldn't help with tuition, repairs, or unexpected expenses. Every conversation where they insisted everyone had to make sacrifices. That wasn't the whole story. They had money when Keaton needed it. They simply chose where it would go. By the end of the call, I wasn't angry because he had confessed. I was stunned by how normal he believed it all was. He spoke as if being rescued over and over again was just part of life. After we hung up, I sat in complete silence. This was no longer about hurt feelings or childhood memories. My parents hadn't simply favored one child. They had slowly sacrificed their own financial future to keep Keaton afloat while convincing me they couldn't afford to help me. That realization changed everything, and I knew I could never look at my family the same way again. The morning after Keaton's call, I wanted to demand answers from my parents. A part of me wanted to drive straight to their house and ask why they had lied for so many years. But I knew emotions wouldn't get me the truth. If I confronted them without proof, they would probably deny everything or tell me I was overreacting. So I stayed quiet. A few years earlier, my father had asked me to help organize some family paperwork because he wasn't comfortable using spreadsheets or digital files. I remembered where many of the records were kept and what I had seen back then. At the time, I hadn't paid much attention to the numbers. Now I looked at them with completely different eyes. Night after night, I reviewed old bank statements, loan papers, and financial records that had passed through my hands. I compared dates, payment amounts, and account balances. Slowly, a clear picture began to appear. Large withdrawals had been taken from my parents' retirement savings. The equity they had built in their home had almost disappeared. New loans had replaced old ones, and credit balances kept growing instead of shrinking. None of it was random. The timing matched Keaton's failed business projects almost perfectly. Whenever one of his plans collapsed, money quietly left my parents' accounts. When he ran into trouble again, another loan appeared. They had been fixing one problem after another while pretending everything was under control. I started writing everything down, creating a timeline that connected each financial decision. The facts spoke louder than any argument ever could. The more I uncovered, the calmer I became. My goal wasn't revenge or humiliation. I wanted the truth, and I wanted it to be impossible to deny. By the time I finished, I understood something my parents still refused to admit. They hadn't lost their financial security overnight. It had disappeared one choice at a time, each decision made to protect Keaton while expecting everyone else to accept the cost without asking questions. A few weeks later, everything my parents had been trying to hide finally caught up with them. Keaton's newest business failed just like the others, but this time there was no money left to cover the losses. The people he owed stopped waiting and started demanding payment. Phone calls came every day, letters filled the mailbox, and the pressure kept growing. For years, my parents had found a way to protect him from the consequences of his decisions. Now they had reached the end of the road. Their savings were gone. The retirement fund they had spent decades building had almost disappeared. Monthly bills piled higher on the kitchen table, and the mortgage they had struggled to keep up with slipped further behind. Then the foreclosure notices began arriving. The stress changed everything inside their home. Family dinners became arguments. Every conversation ended with someone raising their voice. My father blamed bad luck. My mother cried and insisted things would somehow work out. Keaton promised another big opportunity was just around the corner, but nobody believed him anymore. Relatives started noticing something was wrong. They could see the tension during family gatherings and hear the forced smiles that covered growing panic. Rumors spread, but no one knew how deep the financial damage really was. I watched everything from a distance. Seeing my family fall apart didn't bring me satisfaction. I wasn't keeping score or waiting for revenge. Despite everything, they were still the people I loved. Watching them struggle hurt more than I expected. At the same time, I refused to rush in and fix another problem they had created themselves. Every rescue had only delayed the truth, making the situation worse with each passing year. For the first time, I understood that helping someone doesn't always mean giving them money. Sometimes the greatest help is allowing them to face the consequences they have spent years avoiding. Until they accepted responsibility for their choices, nothing would ever truly change. One quiet evening, the doorbell rang just as I was finishing dinner. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, my parents stood there without a word. They looked nothing like the confident people I had always known. My father seemed older than I remembered, and my mother's eyes were swollen from crying. For a moment, none of us spoke. I stepped aside and invited them in. They sat at my kitchen table, the same place where I had once cried alone after my housewarming party. The silence felt heavy until my father finally cleared his throat. He admitted the bank was preparing to take their home. They had fallen too far behind on the mortgage, and there was almost no time left to stop the process. Every attempt to borrow more money had failed, and they had nowhere else to turn. My mother reached across the table and quietly held my hand. She said families were supposed to help each other during difficult times. She reminded me that no matter what had happened in the past, we were still connected. They needed support and they hoped I wouldn't turn my back on them. I listened without interrupting. Months earlier I would have agreed before they even finished speaking. But too much had happened since then. I had learned the truth about the sacrifices they made for Keaton and the excuses they had given me for years. When they finished, I looked at both of them and asked the only question that mattered. When I stood alone at my housewarming, where was my family? The room became completely still. Neither of them answered. My father lowered his eyes to the floor. My mother's hand slowly slipped away from mine as tears filled her eyes again. That silence told me more than any explanation ever could. For the first time, they were forced to face the pain they had spent years pretending not to see, and they finally understood why I couldn't simply pretend nothing had happened. I didn't tell my parents to leave. As hurt as I was, I couldn't ignore the fear on their faces. They had come to me because every other option had disappeared. Still, I knew that giving them money without changing anything would only repeat the same cycle that had brought them here. I took a deep breath before speaking. "I'll help you," I said, "but only if we're honest from this moment forward." They looked at me with quiet hope, waiting for me to explain. "I don't want another excuse or another promise. I want the truth. You need to admit that you've spent years paying Keaton's debts while telling me I had to earn everything on my own. You need to stop pretending we were treated the same because we weren't." The room fell silent again. My father was the first to react. His face tightened and he immediately tried to defend their choices. He said they had only done what they thought was best. He insisted every parent makes difficult decisions and that they never meant to hurt me. For the first time, I didn't argue. I simply looked at him and waited. The longer the silence lasted, the weaker his excuses sounded. Even he seemed to realize the words no longer carried any weight. Then my mother began to cry. She covered her face for a moment before quietly admitting they had convinced themselves I didn't need help because I always found a way forward. They believed I was strong enough to handle disappointment while Keaton wasn't. Hearing that didn't make the pain disappear. It only confirmed what I had already known. I told them I wasn't asking for an apology to make myself feel better. I needed them to face the truth because nothing could be rebuilt on denial. If they wanted my help, it had to start with honesty. Without that, no amount of money would save our family or repair the years we had lost. A week later, I invited our closest relatives to dinner at my house. Nobody thought it was unusual. They assumed it was simply a chance for the family to spend time together after months of growing distance. People arrived with food, desserts, and warm smiles, unaware that the evening would change how they saw us forever. After everyone finished eating, I stood up and thanked them for coming. Then I placed a folder on the table. Inside was a timeline I had carefully prepared. It showed years of loans, withdrawals, and payments that had quietly disappeared into Keaton's failed businesses. I explained each document without raising my voice or blaming anyone. I wasn't there to embarrass my parents. I wanted the truth to be seen clearly. The room slowly grew silent. Several relatives looked at my parents, waiting for them to deny what they had heard. Instead, I turned toward Gavin and Celeste. "I've said everything I needed to say," I told them. "Now it's your turn." Neither of them spoke at first. My father stared at the papers while my mother wiped tears from her face. The silence lasted so long that no one dared interrupt it. Finally, my mother took a deep breath. She admitted they had spent years choosing Keaton whenever he faced another crisis. They kept telling themselves I would be fine because I had always managed on my own. Every time they made that choice, they believed they were protecting the child who needed them most. My father slowly nodded in agreement. He confessed they had ignored how much those decisions were hurting me because they assumed I would eventually understand. No one around the table said a word. Some relatives looked shocked. Others lowered their eyes, realizing they had never questioned the family story they had been told for years. For the first time, nothing was hidden behind excuses or polite smiles. The truth filled the room and everyone finally understood that the deepest damage had never been about money. It came from choosing one child while expecting the other to quietly accept being left behind. Nothing felt the same after that dinner. The truth had finally been spoken aloud and there was no way to put it back. For years, everyone had believed our family was close, loving, and supportive. That picture disappeared in a single evening. Over the next few days, my phone kept ringing. Some relatives called to apologize. They admitted they had judged me for pulling away from family gatherings and answering fewer calls. They thought I had become cold or ungrateful. After hearing everything, they realized they had only seen one side of the story. I accepted their apologies, but I couldn't pretend the past had never happened. Understanding the truth didn't erase years of disappointment. The biggest surprise came from Keaton. He asked if we could meet, and for the first time in a long while he didn't make excuses. He admitted he had accepted our parents' help because it was easier than facing the results of his own choices. Every time a business failed, he knew someone would rescue him. Instead of learning from his mistakes, he kept depending on the people who refused to let him fail. He lowered his head and quietly admitted that he had never stopped to think about what those sacrifices had cost me. Hearing those words brought a strange sense of peace. I wasn't happy about everything that had happened, but at least someone was finally taking responsibility. My parents also began to understand that protecting Keaton had never truly helped him. By shielding him from consequences, they had delayed the lessons he needed most while damaging their relationship with me. The family everyone admired no longer existed. What remained was something less perfect but more honest. Every secret was out in the open, and each of us had to face the choices that brought us there. It wasn't an easy beginning, but it was the first time our family stood on the foundation of truth instead of carefully protected lies. My parents moved into my house a few days later, but this time everything was different. I welcomed them with kindness, not blind trust. We agreed on clear boundaries from the beginning. They would contribute to the household, respect my space, and take responsibility for rebuilding our relationship through their actions. Empty promises were no longer enough. The first few weeks weren't easy. We shared meals, but conversations were often quiet. There were uncomfortable moments when old memories returned, reminding all of us how much damage had been done. Still, nobody ran from those difficult discussions anymore. My father slowly stopped making excuses for the past. Instead of defending his choices, he admitted where he had failed. My mother worked just as hard to earn back my trust, showing me through small everyday actions that she wanted things to be different. Change came slowly, but it was real. Keaton also started rebuilding his own life. For the first time, he handled his responsibilities without expecting someone else to rescue him. Watching him accept the consequences of his decisions gave me hope that our family could finally move forward. Not every wound disappeared. Some memories still hurt, and certain moments could never be replaced. My housewarming would always remind me of the day I felt completely alone. That pain became part of my story, but it no longer controlled my future. One evening, I stood in the same kitchen where I had once cried before serving cake to my guests. The room looked exactly the same, but I felt completely different. I realized my greatest victory wasn't seeing my family struggle or proving them wrong. It was finally choosing peace over approval. I stopped chasing the love I had spent years trying to earn and started valuing the life I had built with my own hands. That choice gave me something no one could ever take away again. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share where you're watching from. Your support keeps these meaningful stories coming. Thank you for being here.